up a little. I'll see you later.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Friday night, 6 o'clock. I'm in for Michelle tonight as we see a little bit of rare good news from the Middle East. Incredible footage of hostages being released as part of a prisoner swap between Israel and Hamas. There are several groups here in the UK now calling for people to come together from all sides in peaceful vigils. And after the tragedy in Dublin yesterday, where 3 children and 2 adults were stabbed in broad daylight, mobs rioted later in the evening, burning and looting the beautiful city of Dublin. Why? Let's talk about that. What are those men so angry about? Let me know your thoughts, won't you, on email. And Black Friday has thrust itself upon us once again, just like many American imports. But Amazon workers around the world have chosen today to strike for better pay and conditions. Is Black Friday a con, and is it harmful to workers, or is it a good day to get a deal? And do parents trust teachers anymore? The head of Ofsted says that the social contract between teachers and parents has been broken. Is she right? And if so, why? It's all to come in the next hour. Get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address, or on Twitter @GBNews. But first, the very latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom.
Bev Turner, thank you very much. This is the latest. As you've been hearing, 13 Israeli hostages released by Hamas are back in Israel. That's according to the Israeli Defense Forces. These pictures show the hostages being transferred in Red Cross cars via the Rafah crossing a short time ago. More aid is being allowed into Gaza, which is expected to continue over the coming days. There was also a further group of Thai hostages released by Hamas following separate mediation efforts by Egypt and Qatar. Those released today include 13 Israelis, some of whom are dual nationals, 10 Thai citizens and a Filipino national. Well, we can take you live now to the Hatzerim Air Base, where that group of Israeli hostages due to arrive soon. Qatar's foreign ministry says 39 Palestinian women and children have also been released from Israeli prisons as part of the deal. A temporary pause in fighting came into force this morning, expected to last 4 days. Now, Margalit Moses, Daniel Aloni, Amelia Aloni, Adina Moshe, Ohad Munda and Ruth Munda. Just 6 of those Israeli hostages who've been released today. A full list of Israelis who've been freed has been released by the Prime Minister's office. They include 1 male and a range in age from 85 to as young as 5. The Israeli Prime Minister has said, "We're committed to the return of all of our hostages." To other news now, 34 people have been arrested after riots and violent scenes in Dublin yesterday. A clean-up was underway this morning in the city centre after cars were set alight and shops were looted. A number of police officers were also injured. The violence was sparked after 3 children and a woman were stabbed close to a school in the city yesterday. A 5-year-old girl is said to be in a serious condition. Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said the people involved in the unrest brought shame on the country.
Those involved brought shame on Dublin, brought shame on Ireland, and brought shame on their families and themselves. These criminals did not do what they did because they love Ireland. They did not do what they did because they wanted to protect Irish people. They did not do it out of any sense of patriotism, however warped. They did so because they're filled with hate. They love violence, they love chaos, and they love causing pain to others.
Oscar Pistorius will be freed from prison on parole in January, almost 11 years after killing his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day in 2013. The former Paralympic champion, who's now 37, claimed that he fired the gun through a bathroom door after mistaking his partner for an intruder, saying he feared for his safety. He was initially jailed for 5 years, but an appeal saw him sent back for 6 years in 2016, less than half of the 15-year minimum term that had been sought by prosecutors. Nissan has announced a £1.2 billion plan to build electric versions of 2 new cars at its Sunderland plant. The Japanese automaker's new electric Qashqai and Duke models will be manufactured at the site. It's also expected to bring wider investment in the industry, including the construction of a new gigafactory to make more batteries. Rishi Sunak's facing a backlash from senior members of his own party after new figures revealed migration is at an all-time high. Reports suggest MPs are demanding action to reduce the number of people coming legally to the UK. Net migration peaked at 745,000 last year, a record high. Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride says measures to reduce the number are already in place.
We accept that the figures are too high, and that's why, for example, recently we announced that in the case of 150,000 student visas, we'd be clamping down on them, bringing dependents in with them. We're putting up the cost of visas, a number of different measures. And the OBR, who are the independent forecasters who look at the kind of impacts of these steps, recognise that this will in itself start to bring the level of migration down. But there is more to be done.
And a familiar face is returning to London's Oxford Street as music shop HMV reopens its doors. The historic retailer returns today after a 4-year absence, reclaiming its old flagship location in what's hoped to be a boost for the popular shopping strip. GB News reporter Ray Addison is there.
HMV's return to profit means that new owner Doug Putnam has been able to reopen the brand's flagship store 4 years after it shut down here on Oxford Street. He's going to be hoping that it can once again become a mainstay of the high street. Now, over the years, influential acts such as Michael Jackson, the Spice Girls and the Beatles, no less, have all performed here. It's also been used as an air raid shelter in World War II and burnt to the ground and been rebuilt. Now it'll have to survive the tough economic conditions as many shoppers tighten their belts.
This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Bev Turner.
Very good evening. Welcome to Dewbs & Co. With me, Bev Turner, tonight while Michelle takes a Friday night off. Joining me until 7, my panel, Conservative life peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and writer and trade unionist Paul Embry. Make sure that you get in touch with us this evening. GBViews at gbnews.com or on Twitter at GBnews. Gentlemen, we have brand new stools tonight. There will be very little squeaking. How comfortable is it this evening, Daniel?
I can't believe that I've been given the privilege of being the first person to be allowed to sit
Mine
in
is
this
excessively
stool.
They are.
I might carry over to the next show as well. If that's all right.
GB News is going up in the world. We have brand new stools. Right, it was a little glimpse of good news today. The first 13 hostages held by Hamas have been released. They've been handed over to the Red Cross as part of a deal for a temporary ceasefire with Israel. We're looking at the pictures here from just a little earlier. There was a pause in fighting between Israel and Hamas that came into force this morning. As you say, it is a small piece of good news in an otherwise horrendous war. Now, gentlemen, we're seeing nothing but division at the moment, it feels, in this country, partly because of the war in the Middle East, but it started, if you go back, it started before. I think you would put Brexit into that category. We'd also put lockdowns in there. Then we had Ukraine, and it feels like in all of these instances we're encouraged to pick a side, You're either right or you're wrong, and then you turn against people who don't agree with you. On a day like today, though, I think it's worth considering how we move forward, Paul, without everybody hating each other, without there being violence on the streets. Would you like to see this, in a sense, be the start of people moving towards that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I welcome this very strongly. You do have two sides, including in Britain, at each other's throats, whether they're the pro-Israeli side, the pro-Palestinian side. And we need to remember that this is not a binary conflict, actually. This is a conflict where both sides have got a just cause to a certain degree. I'm not talking about Hamas. I have no time for Hamas. They are terrorists. But the Israelis and the Palestinians more widely, both sides in that dispute have got legitimate causes. They've got legitimate grievances historically. And I've been really disappointed by the way in which some people have adopted binary positions on what is a complex conflict.
Why do you think that's happened, though? I have a suspicion it's because there was largely an ignorance about the situation in Israel and Palestine. October the 7th happened. It was broadcast all over social media, and therefore, instantly, it was the Palestinians were the good guy, and therefore there's a confusion about the difference between the Palestinians and Hamas as a terrorist organisation, particularly maybe amongst the young, which is not to say that there isn't, there is nuance here.
Yeah, well, Palestine has always been a cause that's been associated with many people on the left, and of course many people on the left see Israel as an enemy because it's so closely linked to America, which on the left is public enemy number one. Although, interestingly, Israel has had historical support on the left. The Labour Party itself, Labour Party Friends of Israel, Trade Union Friends of Israel, a group that I've been involved in the past. So it's not like everyone on the left is anti-Israel. But interestingly, just as there is a dichotomy on that issue across wider society, that's very much the case on the left as well. I've seen people on the left at each other's throats over this issue, whether they're pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian. And I just think, and I've argued on the left, look, the only way we're going to resolve it, whether we like it or not, I don't think one side is going to beat the other in this conflict. Israel is clearly more powerful than the Palestinians, than Hamas. But obviously, you've got to factor in the fact that Hezbollah is potentially involved, Iran is potentially involved. So I don't think one side is necessarily going to defeat the other. Because the reason being, from Israel's point of view, you can't kill an ideology. This is the key thing. You might be able to degrade Hamas, and I'm sure they're going to achieve that to a greater or lesser extent. But then you have to think about what comes next, because the idea that the Palestinians, if they see Hamas gone, are going to and allow kind of Israel to occupy the place for whatever period of time, are then going to say, oh, well, that's fine, that's the end of the dispute, we've no longer got Hamas protecting us, I think is pie in the sky. What you end up doing is breeding a new generation of terrorists. So I know there are people out there who want to see a military solution to the conflict. I think there's only going to be a political solution. That's the reality.
Daniel, we could spend all night here talking about the rights and wrongs of this particular conflict. But do you think one of the reasons, as I was saying, that there is it has become so divisive, particularly amongst people who didn't really have an opinion on this until recently, is because there is a kind of ignorance about the history of this conflict for a lot of British people?
Well, there's a history about abroad generally in Britain, and people don't know as much as they should. And I'm sure that contributes to something. It's very difficult to disagree with what Paul has said in the very general terms in which he's said it, and that there is right and wrong on both sides, and there is a history. That's absolutely true. But nonetheless, the fact is that a ceasefire in itself is a military objective for Hamas, that there has to be, as a goal of this conflict, there has to be an idea that Hamas as an organisation is going to be operationally eradicated, and that is going to take military action. And that is something that the Israelis are not only entitled to, in my view, but they're doing it also on behalf of the West. So the idea that we're all going to get together and love each other and so on and find solutions, that simply isn't possible while you have an organisation there that is dedicated to the eradication of the Israeli state and willing to undertake terrorism against grannies and children in order to achieve their ends, boasting of it.
But if we do you think, Daniel, then, do you disagree with me then, and you believe that there can be a military solution to this historical, complex, multi-layered...
No, there can be a military solution to the eradication of Hamas.
But that doesn't solve in the long term.
No, but there is a the IRA is no longer operative, and so conditions are created in which you can have some form of peace and some form of collaboration.
There was a ceasefire before we reached the
and
Belfast
some form
Agreement
of peace
in
and
98, wasn't there?
Yeah, but it was a ceasefire based, frankly, on the utter degradation of the IRA by penetration by British agents. I mean, they were utterly.
As Jerry Adams said, they haven't gone away. You know, come on.
They were utterly defeated. If they haven't gone away,
utterly defeated.
You know, they were utterly defeated as a military force.
But look at this. This is kind of QED. This is what I'm talking about. We have two people, very intelligent, articulate, informed
Flattery will
people.
get you everywhere, Ben.
In the absence of them, we book those two. We've got you two. But and this is, and instantly tensions go, right? This is what it does. It makes everybody be divided, and I don't want that in this country. And I just want to look at a couple of initiatives that are going on, because that's what we have to be. That's what I think we have to be mindful of, is how we don't allow this conflict over there to cause more division in this country. This weekend there's going to be a record 40,000 people are poised to walk in solidarity at the National March Against Anti-Semitism, according to organisers. We've had these pro-Palestinian marches every single weekend, even on Remembrance Weekend. And there's an organisation now called Together for Humanity, which is Brendan Cox. You will remember the MP Jo Cox, who very sadly lost her life, was killed by a far-right terrorist. And Brendan has set up an organisation, and they're going to have a mass vigil on the 3rd of December, where they want to bring people together from all sides. Brendan Cox's quote is, many people feel paralysed because they're scared that they're going to be called anti-Semitic or Islamophobic or pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, or just to get it wrong in some way. We're looking at a picture of Brendan there. No doubt you will recognise his face. We need more of this as well, don't we, here in this country?
Yeah, look, first of all, we don't need to be divided in this country because, broadly speaking, this country is wholly irrelevant to what's happening in Gaza and Israel.
Tell that to the West End at the weekend when it's full of Palestinian
we could all ignore the whole thing and it would make no practical difference to the outcome. So if we choose to, if people want to make a fuss about it and go virtue signalling and go on marches, that's fine. Is it good if people come together and are more united about it? Well, of course, that's absolutely a very good idea, and I praise the motives of the people organising these marches. But marches don't actually create unity. Marches are for people who go on marches.
But they create unity for that particular day, and it sends out a very powerful message of division. I mean, the Labour Party is tearing itself apart over this issue, Paul.
Yeah, as I say, that's a reflection of the historical differences on the Israel-Palestine issue. I don't agree with Daniel necessarily that marches don't achieve anything. I mean, look at apartheid in South Africa, for example. The reason that apartheid came to an end was simply because of the huge international pressure and the international anti-apartheid movement that campaigned for sanctions, that put people on the streets, that boycotted South Africa. And although on the face of it, you don't necessarily think at the time, I've been on plenty of marches in my time as an activist on the left, trust me, and you think at the time you're not necessarily making a difference. Often, in the greater scheme of things, you are. Look, when David Cameron wanted to go to war in Syria 10 years ago, whatever it is now, and the Labour Party and most MPs voted against it and stopped it from happening, stopped that military action from taking place. I think that was a hangover from the Iraq war 10 years previously because of the fallout of that and the huge pressure on the government at the time not to go to war and the massive criticism it got afterwards. I think that lots of MPs thought, hold on a second, we could be doing exactly the same thing again. So it's like throwing a pebble into a pond, you know, it can have a ripple effect for a long, long time afterwards.
Yeah.
So don't write off demonstrations and protests.
Yeah, you're not going to create unity by demonstrations and protests.
Well,
you're not going to create unity.
Vigil.
What creates unity in a country is adherence to institutions.
Adherence to institutions.
Adherence to institutions. We've spent the last 30 or 40 years totally trashing our institutions. The only things people feel united about now are the monarchy, thanks to the late Queen and the way she conducted herself in that. I'd say the monarchy is broadly a unifying thing. And in some cases to national sports teams, although they have turned out to be tremendously woke and useless when it comes to anything to do with the current conflict. Everything else we've sort of trashed. But that's what actually makes people feel they're part of something, they're part of a bigger thing. And we really do need a programme of nation building, not marching up and down Whitehall by sort of, bleeding hearts.
No, but I think
I'm just going to interrupt you because, Daniel Mullen, that is the most beautiful trail to my advert break because you've pretty much set up exactly what we're going to be talking about after this very quick break. We're going to be discussing what happened in Ireland yesterday. It was just tragedy, followed by another tragedy. But don't go anywhere. This is GB News.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, tonight, keeping me company until 7 o'clock. Conservative Life peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and writer and trade unionist Paul Embry. OK, it was almost exactly 24 hours ago we saw the tragedy of 3 children and 2 adults stabbed on the streets of Dublin. After rumours that the perpetrator was not born in Ireland, there were mass riots, people setting fire to their own city and police officers being attacked. Ireland's asylum system is currently bursting at the seams. There's a housing crisis that is making people homeless. Can this help to explain the underlying anger in Irish society? Daniel, let me come to you first. What do you think was behind these riots?
Well, I don't know. And I don't know what's behind the riots, and I don't know anything about the person who is alleged to have committed these offences or the rioters. That hasn't been put on television. And, of course, there'll be police investigations and trials, presumably, and charges brought. So one needs to be careful about what one says. But I do think it's clear that the Dublin elite has played this absolutely wrong from the first moment. The first is the head of the Garda Síochána comes on television and will not tell the truth. He will not be honest about what he knows about the alleged perpetrator.
And that's the police.
That's the police. So he won't do that. The second thing is that he characterises the rioters as radicalised by the far right. Now, this is a phrase that is intended to exclude any sort of understanding or wish to understand what is motivating them. If you're radicalised, that's effectively you're brainwashed. You can't have an intelligent conversation with someone who's been brainwashed. And if you're radicalised by the far right, this sort of iconic, mythical far right, then frankly, you're basically a zombie with sort of blood coming out of your mouth as you froth around. And so using that is an attempt to shut down discussion right from the outset. And of course, then the Taoiseach comes on and he says, we have got some of the most draconian anti-hate laws, anti-hate speech laws in the whole of the European Union, and our response to this is going to be to make them even more draconian. So they're playing it completely wrong, and they will suffer from this, in my view.
We're looking at the pictures here, just mindless vandalism, hooliganism and damage. But I'm interested in the why, Paul. Why these predominantly men felt the need to do this last night. What do you think it is? And do you have an understanding of what the phrase far right means?
Well, Ireland is famous for its support for immigration, not least because so many of its own citizens have emigrated across the years. You know, you've seen the Irish diaspora and so on. But I think this is the consequence of an excessively liberal immigration policy. That's the truth of it. I mean, the figures are that something like 112,000 non-Irish, because some Irish citizens returned, but non-Irish citizens arrived into the country last year, second highest on record. I suspect that, you know, we may see those figures again going forward.
Yeah.
And everybody, even the Irish, I think, has got a certain tolerance level. We're talking about here a country of 5 million people, so it's not a big country.
Which was only 3 million a few years ago.
So its population has risen dramatically. There is a housing crisis in Dublin and pressure on public services and what have you. And the truth is that most people, I suspect, in Ireland, just as in Britain, are welcoming of the immigrants and, you know, pro-immigration in a broad sense, but just understand that actually, look, it is a numbers game in many respects. And if the numbers are too high and unmanageable, and we know from history that, you know, immigrants will often settle in already hard-pressed working-class areas, then people do start worrying about, you know, that rapid demographic change, the big cultural changes that take place quickly in their society. On the economic side of things, if there's an oversupply of labour, the impact that that can have in terms of downward pressure on wages and so on. And I often think of immigration a bit like wine. You know, in moderation, it's a good thing, but if you go glug in it and if you use it to excess, then it can have negative impacts, and that's something that we don't seem to understand in this country.
The nuance that you've just communicated there, that you've just described, is a political hot potato. It is a conversational hot potato. There are some dinner party tables in North London where you would be kicked out for making such a radical sentiment as, I'd like to have us limit the number of people who come and live here. How did that happen, Daniel, that we can't have that conversation?
I don't get invited to dinner parties.
Me neither.
In North London.
He hosts them.
We sit here instead.
Been kicked out of a North London
But you know what I mean? There is on my usual...
Ireland is different. Ireland is not like us. Because although he says, you know, Ireland is famously welcoming immigration, that is a very, very recent phenomenon. Okay, Ireland was absolutely not a country of immigration until
I agree.
Until 20 or so years ago. Can I finish, Paul? Ireland.
Go on. Go on.
Just to correct the point, I say generally there's support for the concept of immigration in Ireland, not necessarily large numbers coming in, but because of the Irish diaspora, there's sympathy generally with immigrants. That's the point that I'm making.
Go on, Daniel.
Yeah, I got the point you're making. I'm making a different point. I'm making a point which says that is a very, very recent phenomenon. That Ireland is a country in which there was practically no immigration until 20 or 25 years ago. 30 years ago, you would hardly ever see a black person in Ireland. Nobody moved there. It was a country of immigration. So a lot of this is new for the Irish. A lot of it started, you know, Latin Americans came for contract workers and things like that 25, 30 years ago. Now you have a large number of people who are asylum seekers, and I imagine you have some illegal asylum seekers. Of course, you've got legal asylum seekers, like they've been very generous in welcoming Ukrainian refugees into the country. But I imagine there's illegal asylum as well, because the borders are relatively open. And Irish society is not used to this, and it's being changed in a very dramatic way. And it's very, very different from what's been happening in this country, in our experience, which is a much longer experience of people coming to this country as immigrants right back to the 19th century, with Jews coming and so on, in the late 19th century and so on. So I think Ireland is in a very stressed condition about this. The housing crisis in Dublin, which is chronic. Yeah. I mean, you could say there's been a housing crisis in Dublin since the 19th century. There is a major housing crisis in Dublin, which can only be made worse, I assume, by the pressure of immigration. And people blame politicians for it. And rightly or wrongly, they blame the politicians.
But and they're going to blame the immigrants.
They're going to blame them a damn sight more. Blame them a damn sight more as a result of this.
But it is interesting, isn't it? Because when you see flashpoints like this, and like the tinderbox that you've just described, that the slightest thing can set things off, that feels relatively new, I would say.
Well, I suspect there were far-right elements in that riot last night, actually. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I think if you are somebody who, you know, because of what happened yesterday in terms of the stabbing, you go, as some of them did, some of these protesters did, and set fire to a hotel which was housing migrants. And we saw the pictures on social media. There may have been kids in that hotel.
Yeah.
Then, frankly, you deserve exemplary punishment.
Why do you
no sympathy? You deserve no sympathy from.
Yeah, what's that going to do with far right?
What do you mean by far right?
Yeah, what do you mean by far right?
Well,
we can all agree they deserve exemplary punishment.
I accept.
Absolutely.
I accept. There's been an inflation of the term far right to the point where it's almost become meaningless these days. I mean, you get this government, the Tory government, called far right, which I think is a complete nonsense. I mean, my understanding of far right, and I think my generation's understanding of far right, are skinheads and Nazi sympathisers and people in bomber jackets and Doc Martin boots with, you know, tattoos and swastikas and that sort of thing. That's the definition of far right. But what
you've just described fashion, like you've described predominantly their outfit as opposed to their ideology.
No, I don't think you would don an outfit like that, Bev, unless you had that ideology.
Yeah, but I could wear Doc Martin boots and shave my head, but wouldn't make me a far-right
The old Pope
activist.
used to wear Doc Martens.
No, okay.
John Paul II.
But I just want to pressure on the definition a bit more because, like you say, it does get used. I don't even agree with left and right anymore. I think those are absolutely meaningless political terms in 2023.
No, look, I accept people can wear Doc Martens. I've worn Doc Martens myself. Of course, you can, what you wear doesn't always define it. But the point that I'm making is if you are far right and you've got that ideology and that, that dress code, if you like, then you're someone, I think, who deserves to be branded.
So do you mean more like a white supremacist might be a better way of saying it, or just a racist?
Well, I think until fairly recently, I think the term far right was well understood and well defined and was, essentially as I defined it. If you go back 10 or 20 years and you use that term in political discourse, I think most people would have shared my definition. I mean, I went to Labour Party conference and see delegates getting up and describing Brexit as a far-right project. I've seen, as I said, trade union leaders describe this government as a far-right...
We get called a far-right channel. I've never seen a pair of Doc Marten boots in this building.
The problem is, the people who genuinely are far-right, the people with the swastika tattoos and, the skinheads and whatever, it allows them to get away with it because then they just seep into the wider crowd.
So was there a time when you understood what far-right was, Daniel, but now that meaning has changed?
Yeah, there were a couple of parties 20, 30 years ago, like the British National Party, and there was another one.
National Front.
National Front.
Yeah.
That's right. Which you would put into a category of sort of heirs to Mosleyism, if you like. And they never attracted any significant electoral support, and they never did any real damage or harm. You could largely ignore them. Now we see this sort of threat as if, they're somehow, if you're not watching the far right the whole time, they're going to come and get you and they'll swamp the country and we'll all be wiped out by the far right because they're so... But I don't think they've got any more support than they had back then.
It's a way of dismissing, if you like, traditional small c conservative opinions that are actually held by millions of people in this country.
Yeah.
Now,
just like in
10, 20 years ago, those opinions would not have provoked any kind of contentious debate at all in terms of whether they would be, how they would be branded. But nowadays, they often get dismissed as being on the far right. I mean, it's insane, actually. It needs to be challenged.
OK, I want to carry this on after the break, because I don't think we really scratched the surface of that. It's a big issue, and especially having a Conservative peer here, because...
Why?
Well, because what is it that is being conserved by this Conservative Party? Because clearly the people who were reacting last night, and we're seeing it with this idea of far right gets thrown around at people who actually want to see more of what they recognise as Great Britain being conserved, whether that is the demographic of the population, our institutions, if you like, as well. But anyway, don't go anywhere. We're going to be talking about that in just a moment. This is Dewbs & Co with Bev Turner this evening.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good evening, Bev Turner here, sitting in for Michelle just for tonight. I've got Paul Embry and Daniel Moylan with me. We were talking just before the break about the riots last night in Dublin and why that might have happened, and the idea that instantly the Taoiseach came out and said, these are far-right protesters. The media have all described them as far-right protesters. We kind of touched on it, Daniel, before the break, but I'm interested in what those young men are angry about, and it is to do with immigration and the tearing down of the social fabric and what they might see as a country that they want conserving rather than changing in such a rapid way. We had huge immigration figures, record immigration figures into the UK this week at just over 700,000. 600,000 the year before was rounded up to 745,000.
It was hardly a rounding up. It was an extra 140,000 people.
Where did they come from, by the way? Why did that figure did that figure get rounded up just in order to make this year look better?
I don't know. Just to deal with Dublin, I can't speak for what those people who were rioting thought. But like you, I think we should be interested. Even if we're wholly unsympathetic, we should want to know. And the Irish state doesn't appear to want to know, and that will be to their detriment. It really will. I'm obviously happier talking about my own country, where I know a little bit more about things.
Well, please do.
And of course, the figures are indefensible. And a leading backbench member of Parliament, I believe, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, has appeared on your channel and apologised for them personally. And I think there should be a lot of apologising for them because they are completely indefensible. They're driven by the Office for Budget Responsibility model, which basically seems to be running the country now and running the budget, which says the more immigrants you've got, the better off you are and the more you can afford tax cuts. But of course, you might be better off as a country because you've got more people and more economic activity. You might be bigger as a country, but you're not bigger necessarily as per head. And in fact, you might be worse off per head, which is how a lot of people feel, and understandably, because incomes are going down, not up.
So do you think that it is as simple as that? When we talk about there doesn't seem to be will in the Home Office, there doesn't seem to be a will at the height of government, at the top of government, to control immigration figures. You think it is simply because they're looking at numbers on a balance sheet and deciding that immigration equals money?
I think there's a mixture of things. That's one of them. That's a very powerful driving force. But there's also the question of whether the organs of state are fit for purpose. I mean, if you ask the Home Office to do something radical and dramatic to reduce immigration, would they actually do it? Are they willing to do it? Would they go on strike? Would their trade union sue the government? And would they be capable, even if they were willing to do it, would they be capable of doing it? And these are very serious questions that nobody at the top seems particularly engaged with. And of course, we'll land on if Keir Starmer wins the election, we'll land on his desk as well.
Yeah.
Because even though they'll be more sympathetic to the Labour Party, it still doesn't make them more competent.
Do you think also, Paul, when we have this debate about immigration, we spend, and I say we as a channel, or the whole media actually, every media outlet, spend so much time outraged about the small boats crossing that this huge legal number, the number of people a city the size of Cambridge arriving in a year?
We lose sight of the bigger picture. And I always say to my colleagues on the left, I try and persuade them that, look, rapid and large-scale movements of labour have got the same ability to cause social and economic disruption in local communities as rapid and large-scale movements of capital. And that is a lesson that the left simply doesn't understand. Most of them these days are in favour of the kind of utopian open borders position, which is actually an inversion of what it was 30 or 40 years ago, where it was understood on the left that actually it was important for governments to have control of the labour supply, because the labour supply is ultimately a market dynamic, which...
So easy to forget that,
like
Paul.
all market dynamics, needs to be regulated.
Which kind of brings us back to our previous conversation about the fact that the left-right paradigm is just utterly meaningless now.
The open borders position, which is now so dominant on the left, was once the preserve of the far-left Trotskyists and anarchists and hyper-liberals, as I call them. And as I say, the position that I articulate still on the left, which is, you know, strong border controls, regulation of the labour supply, so as to be able to plan around housing and welfare and employment to prevent downward pressure on wages and so on. You articulate that position on the left nowadays, as I do, and even though it was entirely a traditional position on the left not so long ago, you're now looked upon as some sort of extreme nativist, you know. And there's you know, that's part of the reason why.
Why?
It's part of the reason why.
Hashtag be kind, Paul. You're on the left. You should be nicer than that. That's what they're thinking, isn't it?
It's a big reason, by the way, why the left have lost the support of so many working-class voters. That's not a coincidence. That at the same time as that position has developed as the dominant theme on the left, they've gradually lost the position. They've lost the vote of working-class voters.
Yeah. One last comment from you, Daniel, if you don't mind, on this particular issue in terms of when are we going to start seeing the people who were rioting last night not feeling the need to do so anymore? I'm not excusing that behaviour. It was ridiculous, it was stupid, it was thuggery. But something triggers them in a situation where they feel like someone who wasn't born here has done something bad. When are those people going to sleep easier?
Well, again, I can't talk about the people in Dublin because we've no idea what they were thinking.
Oh, OK, well, people here who
whatever. But I think people here feel, and I think this is why the small boats are important, though they are not numerically as big as the legal migration by a long way. They're a fraction of it. And that is that people also feel that what the small boats illustrate is unfairness. It's a queue-jumping type thing that we don't like. And it illustrates also the government isn't capable of controlling its own borders. On the legal migration side, people, I think, are a bit more balanced and are willing to say, yeah, we can see that there are some jobs where you actually might need somebody, and so on, the NHS care workers and so on. They're more sympathetic on all of that. But they wonder why students are allowed to bring in large families. So effectively, if you come and study here, might cost you a fair amount of money to get in the first place, but effectively, you can bring your whole family and stay the rest of your life. Nobody quite understands why that is.
Yeah, there was over 100,000. I mean, it does. The government are, to their credit, they are trying to push through legislation to stop that.
They don't need to push through legislation. They could have stopped it before. But we have this university sector which is too large and which is absolutely feeding on these fees and desperately needs them.
And we need to understand that long-standing immigrants in this country themselves, you know, second, third-generation immigrants, they themselves have concern over the lack of control, over, you know, the fact that numbers have been so vast in recent years. There's this myth, I think, that every immigrant or anyone descended from immigrants is automatically in favour of open borders. I speak to a lot of people in that position who are equally as concerned as, if you like...
Happy to pull up the drawbridge. You're absolutely right. Right, we've got to take another quick break, gentlemen. After the break, we're going to be talking about the social contract between teachers and parents, which has never been more damaged. Don't go anywhere.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, I'm normally on the telly at 9:30 in the morning, which might explain why I don't normally get handed a glass of this. It would make Monday to Thursday much more fun. Cheers, fellas.
They slide each other under the desk from Monday to Thursday, don't they? That's what it is.
Well, cheers. It's the start of the weekend. In fact, it's a good job we've got this because we're talking about kids, teachers and schools, and very few issues stress out parents more than this. So, the head of Ofsted, it's her final annual report in the role, and she said that the unwritten agreement between families and children is broken. She said that respecting the policies in return for a good education has been fractured. Ofsted has also seen an increase in parents complaining about school policies, and they're calling for greater central guidance on a number of issues. Right, Paul, you've got kids, right? Mm-hmm. What's happened, because she's absolutely right, that when I was growing up, I'm sure when all of us were growing up, if you did something wrong, your parent believed the teacher that you had done something wrong. I remember if I ever got told off at school, I was frightened of the teacher, and then I was frightened of what my mum would say because she would believe the teacher. Somewhere along the way, that's changed, that the parents now believe the kids. And that has only accelerated post-lockdowns, where school was apparently optional and not that important.
Been a big cultural shift. That's the truth of it. Parents, I think, often find it difficult to believe that their precious little Johnny could possibly do anything wrong. And I think that comes from a society that is too quick to indulge children. Often we treat them as fonts of wisdom, as if they've got all of the knowledge of life. They know the keys to the secret of the universe. We've got to listen to them the whole time. Actually, you know, you do have to listen to kids, of course you do, but their life experience is nothing like the average person. And actually, we dismiss elderly people. We talk about them as gammon. They've got nothing to offer us. You know, only the young generation can point the way forward. Very different to what they do in other societies, places like Japan and China and places like that, where they genuinely value the wisdom of older people. And I think correlated to that cultural shift has been this cultural shift that we see in schools.
I tend to blame the start of most of society's evils of today, Daniel, on Tony Blair. Most routes can lead back to Tony Blair's administration, I think. And something I think did change during that time, whereby children were treated, as Paul says, as just little adults. And we've forgotten the idea that children are children.
Oh, I think it goes back further than that. I think, first of all, the idea that there's an unwritten contract that's broken down is the wrong way of thinking about it. There isn't an unwritten contract that's broken down. There was a relationship between most parents and teachers, which was essentially one of deference in the past. So you go back to the 1960s and 1970s, the teachers were middle class, the parents came in large numbers from this very large industrial working class that we had at the time. And the parents deferred to and looked up to the teacher in that class sense. That started breaking down even before Tony Blair. And it's been replaced by something which, the essential point that we always have to remind ourselves of is that the primary responsibility for educating a child lies on the parent, not on the state. The state is there to facilitate the parent carrying out their obligations and their duties. And indeed, in some respects, to force them by insisting you have to send your child to school. I understand all of that. And we'll make the schooling free, and we'll make it really easy for you to fulfill those duties. But that means you need, in the modern age, some form of consultation, some form of bringing the parents in to decision-making about the way the school is run. And what we're seeing increasingly in schools, especially on hot-button issues like transgenderism and things like that, is that the schools who are confused, and perhaps there should be more central guidance, and I sympathise with the teachers and the head teachers who are very often confused, but are following trends that the parents don't want to follow, and then are trying to blank off the parents from actually being involved. So I think this is a totally different relationship to the one that has existed in the past, and it's not working.
And I think the fading of authority has percolated even through to things like school reports. I mean, when I was a kid, the teachers wouldn't hesitate to give you a negative school report, and you'd be sent home and say, and your parents would be told he hasn't done this, he hasn't done that, he's disruptive, and what have you. And I got a few of those. Nowadays, it seems to me that reports tend to be, glistening and,
well, like job reference.
Well, it's all positive parenting.
Because otherwise, the teachers are potentially worried that they're going to be held responsible for the fact that the kid isn't performing as he should be.
That's interesting. And I think somewhere along the line, in fact, it's interesting that you talk about the 60s and 70s, Daniel, because parenting became a verb. Like, our parents were just parents.
Yeah, there's no such thing as parenting.
Whereas parenting became a verb. And if it's a verb, you can succeed or you can fail at it.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think that changed the mindset of parenting, because suddenly the child is a reflection of whether you're any good at something. Whereas it used to be you had a naughty kid or you had quite a good kid. And
Bev, we have to be honest about
we didn't hold parents to such...
And we have to look at the impact of the general breakdown of family life in this country. Now, I know that sounds like a terribly sort of right-wing argument, and I'll be hammered by my colleagues on the left for saying it. But
swearing Doc Martens down here.
But it's absolutely true. There are more fatherless families than ever. If you have that lack of authority in the home as a child, and you're able to push the boundaries, then the truth is, when kids are not stupid, they go to school and they take that character, if you like, and that belief that they can push the boundaries into school, and then the teachers are then trying to pick up the pieces. I think that general breakdown of family life has had huge consequences, and we never talk about it because we think we're going to offend single-parent families.
But you might think, Daniel, that if the family is breaking down, those single parents would rely more on the teachers to help them with their kids, but instead they're pushing them away.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Because what parents are interested in, what is expected of parents, and it's a good point you make about this idea of, parenting as a thing, it has changed over time. It was not that long ago, it's back in the early part of the 20th century, where the prime concern of parents was actually with the physical welfare and survival of their children.
Yeah.
Roughly from the time of the Second World War on, you could bank that. You could say, I'm pretty confident my child is going to survive infancy, and they'll be looked after.
It was a very low bar, wasn't it?
But it was a low but really important bar.
Yeah.
And so now I can focus on the child's education. What really matters is pushing, sometimes cruelly pushing these children to get the right exam results, to pass the right exams, to get into the right schools, to make a success of themselves educationally and be able to move on. And that was the really important thing. And then in a sense that faded, and so it became, I'm going to make this child into a good person.
Yes.
But that's a sort of immense global activity that you can't measure in exam grades or school tests. And puts huge strain on parents, many of whom, as Paul says, are also struggling, and even if they're married, even if they're a couple, they are struggling with the fact that Gordon Brown created a labour market in which they're both expected to work.
Make a political point.
And can you believe we have run out of time? Well, can you believe we run out of time? Daniel, thank you so much, Paul. Great to see you. Cheers, everybody. I'll be back on Monday morning at 9:30. Have a great weekend.
Hello, welcome to the latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It'll be a cold start on Saturday morning, but it's going to be a sunny and dry day for most with some lighter winds. We've got high pressure in charge, bringing that dry weather to a lot of the country, but it is dragging in this northerly breeze. So that's why we've got quite such a cold start tomorrow morning. But through the rest of the evening, those winds will stay fairly brisk, particularly along the east coast. So still bringing a chilly feel here. A bit more cloud around here, though, so that'll hold the temperatures up a little along the east coast, but across the west it's a different story, as low as -6 degrees in some sheltered glens of Scotland and as low as -4 in rural areas of Wales too to start tomorrow morning. So a crisp and sunny start to the weekend. Plenty of sunshine through the day. The cloud will linger across some northern and eastern coast, but for many of us it will be a dry day. They can't rule out the odd shower now and again across parts of Lincolnshire and Norfolk. Despite the sunshine, it will still feel fairly chilly, highs of 7 or 8 degrees at most, so you will want a couple of layers if you're out and about on Saturday. Through Sunday, it will be a chilly start in the east once again, but in the west, we're starting to see more unsettled weather arrive. A bit more rain arriving into parts of Wales and the south west, as well as Northern Ireland by mid-morning. That rain moves into the southeast on Monday and into Tuesday, and it'll stay dry and bright across Scotland. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
We